the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. Welcome to today's session, which is Early Warning Systems as a School Improvement Strategy. Please allow me to share some brief details about today's session. Our presenter for today is Johan Liljengren. Johan is the Division Manager at Talent Development Secondary, a whole school reform model based at Johns Hopkins University, and an EWS facilitator and trainer with the Everyone Graduates Center, also based at Johns Hopkins University. The Center at Johns Hopkins focuses on research, development, and strategies for schools, districts, and states to keep all students on track for high school graduation and post-secondary success. Johan works with a team of facilitators who support middle and high schools across the country with organizational changes, teacher collaboration, and early warning systems in order to provide students with the support that they need. He oversees TDS's approach to early warning systems and regularly presents and trains at local, state, and national events on how EWS can be used to keep all students on track to graduation. Johan has worked at multiple levels of implementation of EWS, including as the leader of the work at a K-8 school in Philadelphia. Starting in 2008, this work has included support within the Diplomas Now model, a partnership between Talent Development Secondary, City Year, and Communities in School, which began in Philadelphia and has now expanded to over 50 schools across the country. Today's session will last for approximately 45 minutes with multiple opportunities to enter questions via the chat function and discussion implications of the information presented. We will be placing everyone on mute, and this call will be recorded. Please do not unmute yourself, but instead refer to the chat function on the right side of the screen if you have a question. And please send to everyone so that our host and facilitators can see your questions. If we do not have enough time to get through all of the questions, we will reply to all participants by email as soon as possible after the convening. We encourage you to ask questions or simply share a comment during the presentation. Before I hand this over to Johan, I wanted to share with you the mission of our National Center. The mission of the Center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Thank you, and I turn it over to Johan.
Great. Thanks, Felicia, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining. We have a little bit smaller sessions for these breakouts if you have participated in any of the other ones today. And so we have a smaller amount of content with the idea that we spend a fair amount of time answering questions and discussion around the particular topic. So I encourage folks to add in comments or questions on that. We have a couple of them that were submitted ahead of time that we'll get to as well. But I encourage folks to do that. I think it'll help add to it for other folks on the phone. So I have a few things that I'll share of content, kind of background content, to help get us started, and then we'll dig into questions about the particular topic. Today's session is really around early warning systems as a school improvement strategy. So we're going to talk about this in a couple of different ways. One, I'm going to share a couple of things that are present in the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, that was passed, and that are a part of the law around school improvement and around evidence-based strategies, and I think are a potential place where early warning systems can sit and be a part of. And then second, I think there are kind of three ways, and this is in school improvement strategies generally, where we can advocate that early warning systems can be a part of it and can be a part of that work. So those are, there's evidence of ABCs as indicators. there's evidence that improvement on ABCs has an impact on students' long-term outcomes. And there are beginning studies actually on the actual use of early warning systems, some of them as a part of other work, and some of them as standalone components. So I think those, to me, are three big areas that we could use and we could advocate for how to use early warning systems as part of a school improvement strategy, especially when there's language around evidence-based approaches as a part of that. So that's what I'm hoping to cover for a few minutes up front to get us started, and then we'll dig into questions and discussion as we move along. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, so I'll do just a little bit of background, enacted in December of 2015, passed by Congress and signed by the President. So it is a new version, predecessor law signed in 1965, and it dictates the main source of federal support for nation's K-12 education system. There are two places where there are provisions written directly into the law around evidence-based practices. So I'll share kind of what those are. I'm not going to read through each one of them. So first, there is in Title I, Section 103, there is a section around school improvement. And asking states to dedicate a portion of funds, and you can see how they ask them to dedicate that towards school improvement. And there are a couple of things that they say that they can use that school improvement for. So first, states can use a formula or a competitive basis in order to allocate that to schools or districts that are implementing school improvement activities. So that's the first thing. So written in that states should use a portion of this for school improvement activities, and the states get to decide. They have a couple of options for how they actually do that. And then further, as we dig a step further into that, there are a couple of ways that where evidence-based practices show up in that statute. So the first one, as you'll see there at the bottom of the page in B, is that states can engage nonprofit or for-profit or educational service agencies who have expertise in using evidence-based strategies to improve student achievement. So if states are going to partner with organizations or different entities, they want those entities to have expertise in evidence-based strategies. So that's the first way that's written in around evidence-based. The second one, as you'll see in Title I, Section 1111, there is a second way that they can use that. And this is basically outlining what a district could do in a comprehensive support and improvement plan. So a district could apply that, and one of the criteria that's part of that is that they include evidence-based interventions as part of it. So there are a variety of other ways that we think there's potential that it could be used within ESSA, but those are the ones that explicitly is mentioned in the law and in the statute, where evidence-based practices are a part of that. So I think that's what we know for right now. I think there's other potential ones. We don't know at this point where those, what those will be exactly, but I think there's other potential as well. So that's the first part of it. So we are really, when thinking about early warning systems, trying to think about early warning as how could we fit this within that evidence-based approach? So a couple of kind of core ideas around early warning systems, and I apologize if these are a repeat for folks who attended some of our plenaries on day one, but want to make sure we're having some common definitions before moving further. So there are four kind of core ideas that we have used around early warning systems. So first, that to graduate high school, college, and career ready, students need to successfully navigate key transitions. And we have thought of this as about students need to learn how to be successful at school. The second one is that students signal that they're on or off track towards these outcomes through their behaviors. The third one is that we believe by tracking these early indicators, it's possible to identify and intervene so that we can alter that trajectory. So that just because you have poor attendance at the end of 7th grade doesn't mean that you cannot break that path and that you're going to drop out. We believe we have an opportunity to help that student change that trajectory to get back on track. And then lastly, we really think that EWS can be a school-wide approach. It can help drive decisions about how to apply, yes, the responsive interventions, how do we respond when a student has a flag, but also helps us make decisions about preventative measures, how do we create that climate and culture, how do we think about instructional strategies that really engage students and pull them into school. And then lastly, with early warning systems, we also think of this as needing both sides of it. So an early warning system, yes, needs the data side of it that gives you reliable, valid, predictive data that's unique for action, but we have to pair that with the intervention, with the human side of it, or we won't be able to make progress. So an early warning system really is whole when we have both sides of that, the indicators and the interventions. So what can EWS really offer here? And so a couple of different things that I think it can. So one, I think EWS can really be a unifying approach and can pull together multiple initiatives and intervention approaches throughout a school and be an approach. And so some folks are calling this early warning systems or an ABC on track approach, but can really pull together multiple things, looking at all aspects of students, looking at all aspects of what you're doing as a school. So I think there's a potential for that unifying approach as part of this. And then second, the evidence part of it, and this ties particularly to where we see some of the conversation going around school improvement strategies on a national level. And that's some of what we'll talk about in the remainder of it. So if we're looking for evidence-based strategies, where does early warning systems fit in that? So as I mentioned at the beginning, I think there's good evidence that the ABCs are important, right? So there's, and we'll walk through a couple of highlights of that. So I think you can make the argument that the ABCs, there is evidence that they are important for students. So building a system around tracking them, it's an evidence-based approach, based off of research and based off of evidence that it matters for students to be on and off track for these. The second one, that there's evidence that improvement in these has impact on long-term outcomes. So that's the second one. And then lastly, as I mentioned, studies that include EWS as a strategy. There's actually a couple that are coming out hopefully pretty soon that will have dug into just the EWS as a standalone strategy. So as early warning systems, something that we have evidence that it works as a particular strategy. So I'm going to walk through each of those three. So the first one, just evidence that there is that the ABCs matter. So we have found that attendance, behavior, and course performance matter for students' school success. So, and we've been able to find in research that they are predictive of students who will be successful in secondary and post-secondary. They are also predictive of students who will disengage and eventually drop out. And we've seen that in a variety of different spaces. So the main areas that we have seen, so for attendance, it's, we're flagging students who are meeting 10% or missing 10% or more of school, so that's our chronic absenteeism. We're also want to push on the other end, and students who miss less than 5% of school is kind of on our high achievement category. Behavior, we know that mild sustained misbehavior matters. We know that serious incidents that result in suspensions matter, so we need to think about both of those. And then the high achievement category in that, as we've talked about in a couple of different sessions, one is some of that is climate and culture measurements, so that we're learning about and that we have been offered in a couple of these different sessions, as well as some of there's a lot of interesting work right now going into how do you measure some of those skills, some of those non-cognitive or social-emotional skills that we see high-achieving students exhibit. So that one is less defined on what the college and career ready looks like for that, but I think that's a big space for early warning systems to really expand. And then lastly, course performance. We're seeing that obviously failing courses is our huge flag, but it's really pushing on the high end. How do we get more students with a B or higher average? Those are our students who are being more successful. So there's good evidence here as ABCs as valid predictors. So we've seen that we can accurately identify students multiple years before completely disengaging. We've seen that high achievement levels show success in secondary, and there's actually a fair amount of work going on now to look at post-secondary enrollment, and we've seen differences in post-secondary enrollment and post-secondary persistence, so kids who stay with it and based on what they are showing in high school. So, for instance, there's one that I just read recently that showed that students with higher GPAs, so basically above a 3.5 versus students below a 3, were graduating college at higher rates 6 years basically after graduation. So it's really interesting. We're seeing that both, that they matter as valid predictors at the secondary, and increasingly we're seeing it matters as well in the post-secondary space. And then lastly, we've seen some levels or thresholds vary. So there's we have seen that the ABCs are still consistently predictive. So there are some variation, but we've still seen consistent predictive value from the ABCs. So I think we can make a good case that tracking and monitoring the ABCs, there's good evidence that that can be a helpful support for students. So that's the first one. So the second space that I think we can really make a good case for early warning systems is that there's evidence that if you improve your ABCs, that you can have an impact on long-term outcomes. So not only is it good or bad to have them at a point in time, but that improvement can have a big impact on that. This is the best chart that I have found to be able to show this, and I know for folks who attended yesterday, I know that I shared this yesterday as well, but it to me is really the best one that I have found to to think about this. Is if we think that if the ABCs really are predictive, then if we improve students' on-track rates and they're at that high achievement or they're at higher levels in their ABCs, we should see an impact later on. So what this chart shows is this is from Chicago, and they were focusing on their their 9th grade on-track rate. So if improving the on-track rate matters, then we should see an impact in graduation rates 4 years later. And so what they saw is you can see the kind of maroon, brownish boxes that they almost followed exactly the grayish box, which was the 9th grade on-track rate. So as the on-track rate went up to 60 to 64, 69, the graduation rate 4 years later was following. So we're really seeing that it does matter. It is incredibly predictive. So when we can help kids get back on track, we can change that trajectory in the 9th grade, we're able to have that graduation rate follow 4 years later. So again, I think we can make a case that the ABCs matter, so there's evidence that that matters, and there's also evidence that improvement matters as well. So, and then so the second thing I'll share, and this is actually, we've seen this more in the elementary space, but especially around attendance, that improvement in attendance has an impact on long-term outcomes. So there's a couple of things. So there's one in Rhode Island that chronically absent kindergartners had lower levels of literacy in 1st grade and as far out as 5th grade. So they were seeing impacts, far beyond that time. We had again, from Chicago, we had chronically absent kindergartners had lower 2nd grade scores. And as I've shared earlier, we know student attendance impacts high school graduation and post-secondary enrollment and persistence. So especially for attendance, and we've actually seen this across across K-12, that it has an impact on long-term outcomes. So if we can improve that attendance, we think things can improve that long-term outcomes for those students. And then again, we're also seeing that this is we're seeing GPAs and improvement in GPAs have an impact on students' futures. So this one actually would be assuming that their ACT scores did not improve. So we had ACT scores that stayed the same, so in a 21 to 23 range. But students who had higher GPAs were actually doing better and graduating at higher rates in college. So improvement on that GPA we're seeing actually can help again impact in this case college graduation. So I think from this second category is that we're seeing that improvement of these has an impact on long-term outcomes. So I think, again, we can make a good case that early warning systems help to improve and change those and have an impact on the long-term outcomes of students. And then lastly, there are studies that are beginning to look at early warning systems as a particular strategy. And this one is a little bit less developed, for sure. Most of the studies right now have focused on helping identify what those indicators are. Are they predictive in multiple situations? Are they predictive of high school and post-secondary? Does it matter for different groups of kids, different socioeconomic status, different groups, different regions of the country, rural versus urban? So a lot of the research is kind of focused on that. And we're starting to get more digging into, is a strategy around organizing this, around this work? Can that be an impactful strategy? Are we seeing evidence there? So this is, again, a newer one. So a recent one that we've been a part of out of our center at Johns Hopkins as part of this Diplomas Now model, which has early warning systems as one of its key strategies. And we're a part of a multi-year randomized control trial with 60 participating schools, 30 that are doing implementation and 30 that are not. And basically in the early release of findings in that, we found that there was a positive and statistically significant impact on the percentage of students with no early warning indicators in 6th and 9th grades. So two key transition stages that we were able to have a significant impact on students there. Obviously, it doesn't show our full graduation rates, which is really what we're trying to ultimately impact. And so that will be released next year. They're doing kind of final year of data collection is occurring right now for those schools that were participating. But I think a good finding nonetheless that early warning systems as part of an approach can have an impact and is part of that. The other one that I will mention that is we don't have results out for it yet, but that is a little bit more focused on just early warning systems, is AIR, is in the middle of a randomized control study on early warning systems to see if that schools that adopted that strategy, again, the idea with a randomized control trial is you get similar schools and you randomly assign one of them to receive the treatment. So they're implementing early warning systems, and the other school is doing something else, but not a prescribed approach. And you're trying to see if there's a difference between those. So they are hopefully coming out with their results fairly soon, and that's folks from AIR, if you're familiar with them. And I think will give us some more information about what have we learned about implementing early warning systems, and how can we see this as a valid strategy for impacting students, and what pieces of it might we need to adapt and shift. So again, I think there's emerging evidence in this third category, which is kind of, I think, the ultimate one that we want to show or be able to show around how early warning systems can be a key strategy for that. So. So I'm going to end here, and I have a couple of questions. I know there's a couple of them submitted that we'll dig into, and Felicia will help field those. As you are thinking about these, I'm also curious on kind of your responses if there are other things that you guys see. So I'm going to pass it back to Felicia. She's going to share some questions, and I'll try to field those as best as I can. If you have a comment or response to one of these discussion questions, please enter it into the chat window. And we'll talk through them over the next. We have about a little over 15 minutes, so we'll try to dig into some of those questions and discussion.
Thank you, Johan, for sharing that information. We will start the question and answer session with the questions that were submitted during the registration process first, and then we will continue with questions from the chat window as time permits. So the first question that I have today for Johan is, how can schools effectively meet the requirements if indicators are out of their control? Schools cannot control absenteeism.
So I think so I'll take it in a couple of different ways for that one. I mean, I think first of all, I think we're making the case that schools do have some control over that, and we have seen schools be able to impact chronic absenteeism. So I think we're trying to make the case that that is the case, that schools can impact that. There are pieces of chronic absenteeism that for sure are outside of the control of a school, that they are not able to impact all of that. But I think we've seen that schools are able to have some impact on chronic absenteeism, and in many cases large impact on that through how they organize. And some of that can be, the preventative work that we do. How do we set up that climate and culture to make sure that students see themselves in a safe space, that they see themselves engaged in that work and engaged in the work of school. So that's one aspect of it, but also that we have this idea of that we're building strong relationships, and we have this idea of problem-solving capacity. So students are running into problems. How do we help them think through that? How do we help a family think through that? How do we help them strategize about how to address what they're facing? So I think there's a couple sides of it, but I really do think we've seen schools that really can impact that, and it's just thinking about what aspects of it can they impact. There are for sure things that are, we can't change about a student situation, but I think it doesn't mean we can't help them change some of their behavior, some of how they're interacting with school. I think that's what we're trying to do around early warning systems. That's what we're trying to do with success mentors and some of these other approaches to addressing chronic absenteeism.
Thank you, Johan. The next question that was sent during registration said, can schools use Title I and Title II funds to contract professional development about EWS?
Yeah, so this one is, it might be locality specific on the use of these, but I do know of situations where funds have been used. So it depends how, you'll have to check with district and state regulations on some of those, on how they have approached that. But I have seen professional development funds from both of those actually being used for professional development. And from both internally to a district and outside. So I think there definitely are options there. It is probably more locality specific of kind of how to go about doing that. But I have seen both of those things occur. So.
Thank you. Another pre-registration question was, what are effective and proven school improvement techniques and strategies?
So this one's obviously is a little broad on kind of what we're looking for in kind of effective school improvement strategies. I mean, I think what I'm trying to make the case, I think early warning systems can be a part of that and can be an effective school improvement strategy. It really depends on what aspect of it you're looking looking to address. I mean, school improvement is a wide variety of things that are needed. Sometimes it is adult capacity that is needed to implement strategies. Sometimes it's a particular strategy itself, a math intervention program that's needed. So it's a wide variety of things. So I don't know if I have a great answer. I mean, obviously from this session we're trying to make the case that there's good evidence that early warning systems can be part of that. The other one is that in a couple of sessions, there's a couple of resources if you're interested in digging in deeper into some of those. The What Works Clearinghouse, there's a website, there's a group of folks trying to compile evidence for ESSA, so it's called Evidence for ESSA. Again, trying to compile research of effective programs that can be a part of a school improvement approach. And there's also the Middle School Matters Institute if you're in the middle grades. Those are three that we have shared. They are compiling research and evidence about program and practices that I think do a nice job of pulling information together, giving you information to make a decision about what will work in your situation. But I think overall it's going to be, there are a wide variety of aspects of school improvement, and you'll have to think about which ones you need to address in your district or school, depending on that context.
Okay, thank you, Johan. That concludes our pre-registered questions. Please use the chat window to the lower right-hand corner if you have any additional questions for Johan.
So I'm also curious on folks' thoughts too, so feel free to enter, responses to the discussion questions as well if those are of interest. We'll wait a minute or two if there are other comments or questions before we sign off. So. All right, so Felicia, I'll share one more thing and then I'll pass it off to you for kind of our final thoughts. So thank you everybody for participating today in the call. I think as I have kind of shared and throughout this, I think early warning systems can be really used in the school improvement space. I think we'll find out a lot more in terms of how the rollout of ESSA will occur, and as states continue to develop that, and as US DOE continues to develop that. So I think we'll continue to learn a lot more and can figure out where the best space is to fit in this. So I look forward to continuing the conversation and figuring out how we can use strategies in the best way to impact students in our schools and our communities. So thanks everyone for attending.
And thank you very much for your information you shared today, Johan. Before our participants log off, could you please wait a few minutes and before disconnecting, take a few minutes to complete a brief poll that will provide us with feedback about this session, as we are always interested in hearing from our participants. And also take a minute to note our upcoming events, which are our April webinars with various topics, and also where you can find resources shared during the convening, and also other resources that will be available from the National Center. If you have additional questions and would be interested in receiving newsletters and or technical site visits from the center facilitators, please visit or email the information to the address shown on the slide. Thank you again for attending and have a great day.